My name is Edward Miller. I'm 68 years old, a retired school counselor who spent most of his life trying to teach young people about respect, boundaries, and basic human decency, values I never imagined would be thrown back in my face by someone who married into my family, but that's exactly what happened the night. My son's wife told me to stay in my room during dinner. Like I was some burdensome old man she had to hide away. I had been living with my son, Mark, and his wife, Lena, for 3 months after recovering from hip surgery, and even though I contributed to groceries, helped with house chores, and kept to myself, I could feel the tension underneath the surface every time she looked at me, like she viewed my presence as an inconvenience she couldn't wait to be rid of. Mark always insisted she was just stressed with work, but there was something sharper in her tone. Something cold, dismissive, almost territorial, as if she believed I was crossing into a home that belonged to her alone. That night, I was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper while they were setting the table, and I overheard Lena whispering harshly to Mark, "I don't want your father out here tonight. Just tell him to stay in his room." And Mark, exhausted, stressed, not wanting confrontation, said nothing, but his silence was enough to tell me that he wasn't going to defend me. Still, I walked toward the dining area because I believed in keeping family traditions alive. We always ate dinner together, but the moment she saw me step into the hallway, she snapped, "Edward, I think it's better if you just stay in your room tonight. We need space." And those words hit me harder than any physical blow, not because of the command itself, but because of the coldness behind it, the way she said, "Stay in your room," like I was an unruly child. An inconvenience, a mistake. I looked at my son for some kind of protest, some sign of loyalty or affection, but he just lowered his eyes, defeated, and whispered, "Dad, maybe just tonight. Please." And in that moment I felt smaller than I'd felt in decades. I didn't argue. Didn't cause a scene. I simply nodded and walked back to the guest room, but once inside, I sat on the edge of the bed feeling something break inside me. Something I didn't know how to name. Humiliation, yes, but also a deeper sense of loss, the loss of belonging in my own family. Hours passed as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of dinner without me, and I wondered how a man who spent his whole life supporting his family could end up here, being treated like a burden in a house he helped his son buy years ago with his retirement savings. The next morning, I woke early, planning to pack a few things and quietly move to a motel until I could figure out my next steps. But before I could even stand up, I heard loud bangs on the front door, not knocks, but pounding, and then Mark's panicked voice, "What's going on?" Followed by Lena's trembling question, "Why are the police here?" And at first I thought maybe there'd been a neighborhood incident, but when I stepped out into the hallway, I saw 2 uniformed officers inside the house, speaking firmly, professionally, and both my son and his wife looked pale. Especially Lena, whose hands were shaking in a way that didn't match simple confusion. One officer turned to me and asked gently, "Sir, could we speak to you for a moment? We received a call about a disturbance last night," and suddenly, everything that had confused me the night before fell into place. Someone had called the police, and they had said my name. The officer stepped closer and asked, "Sir, did you threaten anyone in the household last night?" And I was stunned into silence because I had spoken fewer than 10 words after being told to stay in my room, and none of them were close to a threat. When I told them calmly that I had been alone in my room the entire evening, the officers exchanged a look. And the second one said, "Sir, we're required to check because the caller reported you made aggressive comments." And behind them I saw Lena's face drain of color because she didn't think the police would actually show up. Mark looked at her, confused, then horrified as realization dawned, and he demanded, "Lena, did you call the police on my dad?" And she stuttered, stumbling over her words, trying to spin it, trying to claim she felt unsafe. But the truth spilled out quickly under pressure. She had exaggerated, twisted events, and told the police I was becoming erratic and verbally aggressive, hoping they would frighten me into leaving. My heart dropped at the cruelty of it, at the fact that she was willing to lie to authorities just to push me out of the home I partially funded. The officers asked her to step aside, and they spoke to her separately, their tones stiffening as they uncovered more inconsistencies. Meanwhile, Mark sat on the couch with his head in his hands, apologizing over and over, realizing that his wife had taken advantage of his exhaustion and his conflict-avoiding nature to go behind his back and essentially treat his father like a trespasser. After 20 minutes, the officers came back to me and said, "Sir, we're sorry you had to experience this. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing on your part." And then they asked if I wanted to file a report for a false claim, but I shook my head. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want legal trouble. I just wanted dignity. After the police left, the house fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Lena stepping toward me, trying to defend herself, saying she felt disrespected, that she needed boundaries, that she panicked, but her excuses fell flat because boundaries don't require lies, and fear doesn't justify manipulating the police to intimidate an elderly man recovering from surgery. Mark finally stood up, his voice shaking with anger I'd rarely heard from him. And he said, "Lena, you're going to your mother's for a few days. I need space to think." And without another word, she grabbed her keys and left, slamming the door behind her. Once she was gone, Mark turned to me with tears in his eyes and said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you," and that apology, raw and sincere, broke me more than her cruelty had, because my son had always been good. Always tried to keep peace, and I knew she had been wearing him down for years with her manipulative behavior. We sat down together, and for the first time in a long time, he told me everything. How Lena had been struggling with insecurity, jealousy, and control issues long before I moved in. How she frequently accused Mark of choosing others over her, how she insisted on isolating him from friends and even family, and how he had been trying to manage everything quietly, thinking he could fix it alone. When he finished, I put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Son, you can't save someone who refuses to see themselves clearly, and you shouldn't lose yourself trying to make someone else feel whole." And he cried openly, the weight of years finally breaking loose. Over the next few days, he encouraged me to stay, but I told him I wanted to give him space to sort things out. Not because I felt unwelcome, but because I didn't want him carrying the emotional burden of trying to care for both me and a marriage that was falling apart. So I moved out temporarily, staying with an old friend while decisions were made. Lena tried contacting Mark repeatedly, switching between apologies and anger, but the incident with the police had crossed a line he could no longer ignore. Within a month, he filed for separation. And during one meeting, Mark told her plainly, "If you could treat my father like that, you could do worse someday," and for once, she didn't argue. As for me, I eventually moved back into my own small apartment, independent, stable, no longer feeling like a burden, because I realized that sometimes the worst things people do to you aren't personal, they're reflections of their own internal storms. But what changed my life most wasn't the humiliation of being told to stay in my room, or the shock of police arriving the next morning. It was the moment my son finally saw his own worth, finally recognized toxic behavior for what it was, and finally chose respect over fear. And even though the experience broke something in all of us, it also rebuilt something stronger. The bond between a father and son who finally understood that loyalty should never come at the cost of silence, and that sometimes the most painful moments are the ones that protect us from a future we were never meant to suffer.